Hello. How are you all doing? Good morning to you. This is your lecturer, Mrs. Omogiade. I'm here to take us on MLS 531. MLS 531. The first topic is on carbohydrate metabolism and disorder. Carbohydrate metabolism and disorder. So the question we'll ask is, what is carbohydrate metabolism? Now, carbohydrate metabolism is the whole of the biochemical processes that is responsible for the metabolic formation, the breakdown, and interconversion of carbohydrates in living organisms. So everything concerning the formation, which is the building up, everything concerning breakdown, and everything that concerns the interconversion of carbohydrates, whether from this to that, from that to that, in living organism, is known as carbohydrate metabolism. Now, carbohydrates are central to many essential metabolic pathways. Plants, they synthesize carbohydrates from carbon dioxide and water through photosynthesis. Plants synthesize carbohydrates from carbon dioxide and water through photosynthesis, allowing them to store energy absorbed from sunlight internally. Then when animals and fungi consume these plants, they use cellular respiration to break down these stored carbohydrates to make energy that is available to cells. Now, both animals and plants temporarily store the released energy in form of high energy molecules such as ATP, adenosine triphosphate, for use in various cellular processes. So the carbohydrate you eat is not being used as carbohydrate. It is further broken down into some compounds or substances. And at the end of the day, ATP will be generated, which will now be used in form of energy for various cellular processes. Okay, let's continue. Humans can consume a variety of carbohydrates. Digestion breaks down complex carbohydrates into one, simple monomers. Examples are monosaccharides. Monosaccharides like glucose, fructose, mannose, and galactose. Now, after resorption, which is digestion itself now, after digestion in the guts, the monosaccharides are transported. You know when you eat carbohydrates, after digestion in the guts, the monosaccharides are now transported through the portal vein to the liver, where all non-glucose monosaccharides, like fructose, galactose, are transformed into glucose as well. So both your fructose, your galactose, those are non-glucose monosaccharides. These ones will now be transformed into glucose. Now, glucose, which is known as blood sugar, is distributed to cells in the tissues, where it is broken down via cellular respiration or stored as glycogen in the liver, and stored as glycogen. In cellular respiration, which is the aerobic kind of respiration, glucose and oxygen are metabolized to release energy. Take note, in cellular respiration, which is aerobic, glucose and oxygen are metabolized to release energy, with carbon dioxide and water as end products. I hope we have learned one or two things from this carbohydrate metabolism. I've talked about metabolism being both the build-up, the breaking down, interconversion of carbohydrates into compounds that will now give rise to energy that will be used in form of what? ATP. Now, there is a process known as glycolysis. Glycolysis. We have a metabolic pathway first of all. That metabolic pathway, glucose, when the carbohydrate is being converted now to that glucose itself. Now, glycolysis can take place which will now give rise to glucose 6-phosphate, which will give rise to glucose 6-phosphate. Glycolysis taking place again to give rise to fructose 6-phosphate. Glycolysis taking place again to now give rise to pyruvate. This process can be done the other way too, where the pyruvate goes through glycogenesis. It goes through glycogenesis to become fructose 6-phosphate, which will now go through glycogenesis again to give rise to glucose 6-phosphate, which will now also go through glycogenesis to now produce glucose. So this is just the metabolic pathway of glucose. So we're going to be looking at some terms that are used when it comes to glucose, it comes to carbohydrates, etc., etc. The first one we're going to be looking at today is glycolysis. What is glycolysis? Glycolysis is the process of breaking down glucose. Is the process of breaking down a glucose molecule into 2 pyruvate molecules. The breaking down of glucose molecule into 2 pyruvate molecules while storing energy released during this process as ATP. That is the energy that is released that will be used, that will give us the energy we need to do work. So when glucose is broken down through the process of glycolysis, it gives rise to 2 pyruvate molecules. And while this process is going on, energy, while storing it, will store energy in form of what? ATP and NADH, which is known as nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Now, nearly all organisms that break down glucose utilize glycolysis. I hope you can listen. Nearly all organisms that break down glucose utilizes the process known as glycolysis. Glucose regulation and product use are the primary categories in which these pathways differ between organisms. In some tissues and organisms, glycolysis is the sole method of energy production. This pathway is common to both anaerobic and aerobic respiration. This pathway is common to both anaerobic and aerobic respiration. Glycolysis consists of 10 steps, which are split into 2 phases. Now, during the first phase, it requires the breakdown of 2 ATP molecules. During the second phase, chemical energy from the intermediates is transferred into ATP and NADH. The breakdown of 1 molecule of glucose results in 2 molecules of pyruvate. I hope you are listening. When 1 molecule of glucose is broken down, it yields 2 molecules of pyruvate, which can be further oxidized to access more energy in later processes. Glycolysis can be regulated at different steps of the process through feedback regulation. The step that is regulated the most is the third step. This regulation is to ensure that the body is not overproducing pyruvate molecules. Take note. The regulation also allows for the storage of glucose molecules into fatty acids. There are various enzymes that are used throughout glycolysis. The enzymes, they upregulate, downregulate, and feedback regulate the process. I hope you have understood what glycolysis is, because we are going to be coming back to give us some other terms that are used when it comes to glucose metabolism. So I've said glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose molecule into what? It breaks down 1 glucose molecule into 2 pyruvate molecules while storing ATP as energy, which is released during the process, both ATP and NADH. So we're calling it a day here. I'll come back to come and give us some other terms that are associated with glucose metabolism. See you guys. Bye.